When it comes to Warhammer 40K lore, there are a lot of misconceptions in the community, and some have even become the dominant talking points about certain events and factions. Today we're going to be looking at what I believe is the biggest misconception of all when it comes to the Alpha Legion and their Primarch Alpharius Omegon. And I keep seeing this one come up in the comments of other videos, and people are really attached to it. But like I said, this is a misconception, so I'm here to debunk it. In the Bequin series novel, Pariah by Dan Abnett, Deathrow is not Alpharius because he struggled against a regular space marine. That's the argument that people are making, and I'm going to tell you that this is just way off the mark. And when people say this, I have a lot of things to point out about it. So let's dive right in and see what actually happened in that fight, and then talk about it. And to me, this is nowhere near the most telling evidence in Pariah that Deathrow is indeed the Alpha Legion's Primarch, but we'll look at those moments too. Okay, so from 2012's novel Pariah, from the perspective of Beta Bequin, Teke the Smiling One stepped out of the darkness so we could see him. The rain streamed off his pink and black armor. His 2 gold ribbons fluttered from his hip. "I've been looking for you," he said. He held up Shadrake's siding glass like a lorgnette. It had a crack in it where I had dropped it. "I've been looking for you for a while. You left me at Feverfuge. You hurt me with that word. I had to fight those animals. Fight them. They cut me. I hurt them back." He looked at me. "I thought we had an understanding, Mamselle Beta Bequin," he said. "I thought you understood that you belong to the children now." "Please," I began. "You belong to the children. I've come to take you back so that we can continue our business together." Still smiling, he raised a warning finger. "No bad words now. No pariah tricks. Come with me, or I will kill him and maim you." I truly wished I had the word, but since I had said it to him in that ancient house, it had fled from my memory again and could not be recovered. He took a step towards us. He reached out his hand to me. Where the rain ran off his gleaming armor, it looked like blood. Lightburn snatched out his revolver and aimed it at Teke. "Renner, don't!" I cried. "He will kill you!" "If I don't, I'd better just kill myself," Renner snarled back. "Would you do that?" asked Teke. "Could you? Save me the effort." Then Teke vanished. Something smashed into him from the side and ripped him out of our line of sight. It was as though he had been plowed down by a runaway tram. Lightburn and I flinched at the impact and ran to look. Deathrow, the Warblind, had the monster on the ground, his hands around Teke's throat. Deathrow was almost as big as the warrior of the Emperor's children. He was systematically bashing the traitor marine's head against the pavement of the filthy slum alley. Rain hosed down over them both. I heard the buzz of his optic visor. Teke rallied and smashed the Warblind off him with a formidable punch. The impact of powered fist on plate armor made a sound like a safe door slamming. Deathrow left the ground and smashed into the wall behind him, cracking ancient, soot-frail bricks. Teke was up, rushing the Warblind. His ribbons were swords. His smile became a killing rictus. The cattle dog bounded out of the side street and stormed into him, seizing his left wrist in its massive jaws. The warrior of the Emperor's children howled out in dismay. It was not a cry of pain. He simply seemed revolted at the thought of being touched by a vermin dog. He lashed out and sent the animal flying across the yard. But the dog had bought Deathrow time. The Killgang chief had drawn his oil-dark broadsword. He came at Teke and they clashed. The huge oil blade met and blocked both of the darting golden longswords. Sparks flew. I heard both warriors grunt with effort as they traded potentially lethal strokes and thrusts. Teke had the clear advantage. The Killgang chief was supernaturally strong. I knew this well enough. But he was not in the same class as the traitor Astartes. Teke would kill him. He would outstroke and outfight him. His swordsmanship was far greater. The Smiling One landed a terrible, scouring blow that seemed to rip part of Deathrow's visor and faceplating away. Deathrow's head snapped to the side. I saw fluids spurt into the rain. Cables tore out and fizzled. Deathrow staggered backwards, leaking blood, the side of his head mangled. Teke closed for the kill, but he paused. He had seen something. Something had stopped him in his tracks. I realized he had glimpsed Deathrow's face behind the ruptured visor. How? He began. The distraction was momentary, but the smiling one had dropped his guard. Deathrow plunged his sword into the gap. The oiled black blade went through the traitor marine's belly and shredded out the back plating of his armor. Blood splattered onto the wet pavement behind him, black as pitch. Shorn servos shorted out. Teke screamed. This time it truly was pain. It was pain and outrage and horror. Teke tore himself off the blade impaling him and lurched back across the yard. Black blood was gushing from his wound and mingling with the rain. His face was ashen. He was still smiling. He turned, and the night took him. It was as if the blackness and the rain had conspired to become a curtain to allow his exit. Teke left no trace behind but a few pink rose petals floating on the gurgling pools around the drain. Deathrow sank to his knees, breathing hard. He kept his back to us. He raised his hands to his face and tried to push his damaged visor back together. I took a step towards him. The cattle dog trotted up and stood between us. It glared at me, but not unkindly. "Deathrow?" I said. The dog growled. "Beta? Can I help you?" "You're hurt, let me..." The dog growled again, a negative. "You saved us, you saved me again." The dog remained silent. "I'm pleased to make your acquaintance this day," I said. I looked at Lightburn. He gestured urgently at me to follow and get away. I stopped and looked back at Deathrow. "You're one of his, aren't you?" I said. "You're one of Eisenhorn's specialists. He sent you to shadow me." There was no answer. "Didn't he?" "Yes," said Deathrow. "Who are you?" I asked. He rose to his feet and turned to look at me. I saw that the visor was smashed and hanging off, and part of the scarred and rigid tissue of his face was torn away. But it was a mask. There was another face beneath it, a face that Teke's blow had partially exposed. I could not see it clearly, but even in the gloom I could tell that it was handsome and noble. "Who are you?" I asked. He looked at me for a moment. "I am Alpharius," he said. He turned, and he and his dog were quickly lost in the downpour. Now there are a few things I want to say about this, and from the start it seems like there's a smokescreen obfuscating the events and the truths of this scene. Deathrow appeared out of nowhere and slammed into the side of Teke like a train. Okay, and he's in basically plate mail armor, which would be quite loud, and yet it is almost as if he appeared out of nowhere. Teke is not a mere Astartes, a space marine of a basic sort, as he's been commonly believed to be by many in the community. Teke is a few things beyond that, and those readers and fans who don't play the tabletop might not see the distinction as clearly as those who do. But Teke is both a Chaos Lord and a sorcerer. He's more like a Marnius Calgar level dude than a basic space marine to compare him to a loyalist. And while it is not explicitly stated that Teke is a sorcerer, we see him use warp magic over and over, especially with his twin ribbons that flutter from his waist and become swords when he needs them. But what is explicitly stated is that Teke is one of the greatest duelists who ever lived. He may just be a disciple of Lucius the Eternal because he fights on another level. He's stated to be a master swordsman. Rose petals flutter about him, coming in and out of existence. The guy's a walking warp entity, basically. He's hella torqued up on the warp juice, obviously having drank deep from the Empyrean. Also, he's working directly for Fulgrim, the Emperor's Children's Primarch. He doesn't answer to Eidolon, or Lucius, or any other Emperor's Children. He seems to work directly for and under the management of Fulgrim, making him a very high-ranking agent of Slaanesh. And I think this is what is being overlooked when people keep making the argument. And it is insane how many people parrot this as if they know something. The argument that Deathrow struggled against a mere Astartes, that a space marine would never get the better of a Primarch. But there are two very wrong assumptions with that argument, and as I laid out, the first is that Teke is a Chaos Lord, not a mere space marine, and a Chaos Lord has received many gifts from their patron god. Teke is enormously powerful. But the other very wrong assumption is that there is no way a Space Marine could hurt a Primarch. Well, we know that that is 100% false. Guilliman himself was nearly ended by a handful of Alpha Legionnaires when they attempted to assassinate him. Primarchs have been wounded, sometimes badly, by Space Marines. It's part of what happens. And this is all based upon the notion that power scaling is completely linear in both Warhammer 40K and in actual warfare. Well, I'm here to tell you guys that sometimes the weaker, smaller, or less skilled get lucky. Fights are not linear things. I mean, if they were, then we would never have lost a single member of Delta Force or SEAL Team 6 because they're such superior warriors to other warfighters. The SAS would never have lost anyone, etc. This is just such basic thinking. I mean, I have seen a 130-pound guy knock a 250-pound guy out with a single well-timed, well-placed punch. It happens every day. The fact that Teke landed a blow on Deathrow doesn't prove a thing, except that Teke is exceptionally badass. But it doesn't prove anything about Deathrow. It certainly doesn't prove he's not a Primarch. It is telling that it was a blow to the head, well delivered and struck with a warp-fueled chaos sword, but it did nothing but superficial damage? And that's another thing that deniers will point to. They act like Teke wrecked Deathrow. Nope, he ruined his visor. Another thing that I think needs to be stated is that Deathrow, upon clobbering Teke to the ground, did not immediately stab him or use a weapon, but was intent and content to kill him with his hands. Bare-handed beatdown of smashing the guy's head into the ground over and over. A Chaos Lord of Slaanesh getting pummeled by a guy wearing medieval armor and not augmented by power armor? But it's almost like Deathrow's priority is not to kill Teke, but to protect Bequin. Perhaps they still need Teke for some reason, almost as if Deathrow were investigating him, like a spy. Okay, but there are a few other extremely obvious clues in the story. The first time is when Bequin meets Deathrow for the first time, and he doesn't even talk to her. But they make a huge point of pointing out how this massive cattle dog just follows Deathrow around like he's its leader. Now, this is a very not-so-subtle way of telling us that Deathrow is the alpha here. Yeah, it really is that obvious. It's almost like Dan Abnett is screaming at us, "Do I have to spell it out for you?" But it is the fight where Deathrow saves Bequin from an entire gang of Warblind that really says something. And it is the remark that Bequin makes about Deathrow's abilities that sort of erases any misconceptions about what he is. She states flat out that the feats of strength and skill he displays are far beyond that of the Warblind, and even beyond that of a fully power-armored Astartes. But what happens in this fight is Deathrow just absolutely massacres a couple dozen of the Warblind, which were augmented humans. They were torqued up, pumped full of stems, bionically enhanced, etc. Think like a cross between Goliath gangers from Necromunda and a littler Thunder Warrior. They're described as remnants left over from an ancient war. But yeah, if Deathrow was not Alpharius and only a Warblind, then how come he massacres like 30 guys who are supposed to be on the same level as him? One-on-one, toe-to-toe, anything can happen in a fight. But 30-on-1, or rather 1-on-30, well, that's another issue, at least in melee combat. But let's look at just what he did to the final Warblind that he fought. Deathrow chops this guy in the top of the head, and the blade flies through the guy, chopping him in half from head to crotch and splitting him in two so fast that Bequin noted the blade did not even slow when shearing through the pelvic bone, a feat of strength even a fully power-armored Astartes could not have done. But that's not all. Before those two very distinct halves of the ganger fall apart, Alpharius, or Deathrow, slices him in two again, horizontally. 4 separate chunks of the dude hit the ground. In the blink of an eye, the biggest, most roided up Arnoldarian warrior in the group was turned into 4 chunks. Now, why would Abnett explicitly state that the way he did, really giving us the gory details about how the blade was unimpeded, even through the thickest bones in the body? Spine and pelvis absolutely destroyed as if the cut was a hot knife through butter. He stated that no part of the body offered any resistance whatsoever to Deathrow's blade. And when we get to the blade, it is described as a simple broadsword, little more than a basic hunk of steel compared to the weapons of the 41st millennium. Reading that fight left me much more confident that Deathrow is Alpharius than even the confrontation with Teke. I mean, the guy just absolutely, flawlessly massacres so many opponents and does it so well, using such strength and skill that it is obvious he's far above any of the various Space Marines we see through the series. Yet he's seriously trying to hide his identity from his peers and the community. Though he does reveal it to Bequin, he also knows that his true name would not be of any significance to her. But there are recurring themes that keep arising throughout these books, and one is the Primarchs. Bequin knows of them through art, tapestries, legends, statues. They are known to her, but a mystery, a legend from a far-off time, and they keep bringing it up over and over, drilling into our heads that for some reason the Emperor's sons are important in this story. Everything Abnett shows us is for a reason. There's no bolter that goes unfired, no Chekhov's bolter, if you will. Another thing that we must look at as well as this, Pariah was released in 2012, and Praetorian of Dorn was released in 2017. People say that it can't be Alpharius and Pariah because he dies in Praetorian of Dorn, but we have two twins, two who share their collective identities between them, and share those identities with highly trusted legionnaires in the Alpha Legion. I say that Praetorian of Dorn proves nothing when it comes to one of the twins being in Pariah. And we know Omegon took up Alpharius' name upon his death. We also know that the Emperor's children would not have known of the twin Primarchs, as it was the Alpha Legion's most closely guarded secret. I certainly don't claim to have the 100% definitive answer. I may just be completely wrong after all, but to me, the writing is on the wall. Dan Abnett has delivered exactly what he said he would all those many years ago. A plot twist we wouldn't see coming, and a reveal and return of a character we wouldn't even believe, even as we read it on the page. In my opinion, Deathrow is not Alpharius is the single biggest misconception about the Alpha Legion Primarch, and one of the biggest misconceptions and misreadings of the lore in Warhammer 40K. Funny then that it is one of the most dominant stances people take, and I believe this is for multiple reasons, but mostly just because many people haven't actually read it, and many people are just repeating what they've heard others say. But mostly I think that people just aren't ready for the repercussions of it, and are in denial that Games Workshop and Black Library would move the story forward so much. Anyway, if your fallback position to counter this argument is both Primarchs are dead, Guilliman killed one on Escrador, then watch my video on that as I go deep into the lore of that fight and actually read it to you from the source, a White Dwarf magazine from 2003. Just like in the Warhammer 40K galaxy, there are a ton of lies surrounding the Alpha Legion here in the real world. And just like in the real world, the most vocal people who are literally shouting at the top of their lungs so everyone can hear are often the most off base. And it is so ironic that I say that here on the channel as I shout my personal truth from the mountaintops. But then again, that's to be expected because I am Alpharius.